No, my pleasure. Happy to contribute perspective.
Okay, great. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Mike Steckline, partner with the Institute for Enterprise Excellence. And a real treat today, a friend and colleague, Kevin McNamara from the TIDI Products Incorporated, based out of Neenah, Wisconsin. But Kevin will probably get into a little bit about what the company is doing beyond that geographic location. So a little introduction here as far as logistics. I will be having the phones on mute, but we're going to unmute during the Q&A time. If you've got some questions, you can use the chat function and put those questions there and we'll address them. I'm going to unmute the phones later on during the Q&A if people would benefit from some dialogue and Q&A, and as long as there's no background noise on the phone, we'll be able to do that. This webinar is being recorded, and many people find benefit from going back and referencing it and sharing it with others. So we are recording this webinar. Just a little background context as far as Kevin's topic today. When we talk about trying to apply the principles of enterprise excellence and what that means in organizations, we realize that what seems to be happening is there's in terms of roles and responsibilities, we have people in leader role, people in manager role, people in frontline role, and what evolves is really two main systems, and then I'll call it a third subsystem, but one of the main systems has to do with the strategic focus, handling the problems of the future, getting the organization positioned for the future, being prepared to be successful for the future. There's another complementary system that evolves, which has to do with managing the daily improvement and serving the customers day to day, either internal customers or external customers. And ideally, where would people be spending their time? It's sort of represented by these two triangles here. I guess that would be an ideal state. And this conversation around standard work is a question that a lot of people have questions about, and people are experimenting with what it means. And one way to think about it is how does the standard work connect and coordinate between these two primary systems? And on this screen here, I'll just target in this visual to say, I think Kevin's focus today primarily is going to be around leader standard work and what has that meant for him and his company and how he's trying to approach it. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and he'll provide a little background information on who he is and what he's been doing. And again, Kevin, thank you for taking the time to put this together and share it with others.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike, and either good afternoon or good morning, I guess, depending upon your time zones today. And thank you for joining us. As Mike said, my name is Kevin McNamara. I'm President and CEO of TIDI Products. TIDI is a manufacturer of disposable medical devices, and we actually have manufacturing facilities in Wisconsin, Illinois, California, Mexico, and China. I've been in my role since 2005. And we've really been working at improvement, continuous improvement since around 2007. And I think we kind of adopted the Shingo Model of both principles and behaviors based as the framework for our efforts in around 2013. And I think just today I just want to provide a little bit of an overview of what I would say is an ongoing experiment. That's a key word that I really hope is one of your takeaways today, is just an ongoing experiment with leader standard work. And I particularly like, the visuals and kind of the thought processes that Mike and his team have applied to standard work. I absolutely view what I'm doing on a daily basis as the bridge, if you will. My leader standard work is the bridge between the strategic and the operational component of daily management as that cascades down through the organization. So first slide, please, Mike. So, a couple takeaways again. The Shingo Model is really our guide. A number of you may be familiar with. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today on any of those principles or behaviors. I'm a huge believer, and we're committed organizationally as the artifacts. And you'll see what I mean by that definition, the artifacts, the visuals. We have all of these posted, whether it be our purpose or true north or core values, guiding principles, leadership behaviors, management system, X matrix. We would view those as the artifacts that help guide all of this work. Those are the visual reminders. I'm going to take you through just a very quick tour of our artifacts to set up my leader standard work, because I think you need that context, if you will, to make the link between our purpose and then the principles in particular that I'm focused on that revolve around constancy of purpose, thinking systematically, and enterprise alignment. Right? And I would say this has been incredibly important as we've transformed TIDI over the last decade, primarily through acquisitions. So again, we've used this as a guide to really guide our path forward. Next slide, please, Mike. Okay. This is first and probably most important visual cue. This is our true north visual, as TIDI is a medical device manufacturer. We've really focused our purpose. The reason why the company exists. Focused our purpose around the support of caregivers and the protecting of patients. So our purpose statement is support caregivers, protect patients. One of the challenges in my leadership role is, this ideal future state is that we have all 1,700 employees understand with clarity what the company's purpose is and exactly how their individual work contributes to that. We'll talk about that today, but that's one of the responsibilities that I feel as CEO. The core values, those are TIDI's core values. They sync up pretty well, I believe, with Shingo behaviors and leadership behaviors and then the principles. I won't go into any detail there, but those are our values stated. We've done a lot of work defining those values, kind of keeping them simple, if you will. And one of my favorites is work as a team. The definition of work as a team is all of us are smarter than any of us, right? Because that comes true when you do a lot of A3 thinking or group problem solving. So the link for me is true north, purpose, core values, guiding principles, all kind of set up what my focus is and how I should be behaving within my leader standard work. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, purpose, support caregivers, protect patients. So context, one of the questions I ask myself as I think about the individual kind of inventory of my work, is that work consistent with, or does it support purpose? And you'll see once we get to the template that there's, I guess there's some component of my role that would be called necessary waste as the fiduciary responsibilities of the CEO. I'll talk more about that at the appropriate time. Next slide, Mike. Right. We've done a fair amount of work defining our core values, and these are visuals that are posted, and I would say these are expectations that we have of all employees in terms of their behaviors. It starts with respect for people. I should say respect for people is a critical part of this, that bridges the principles. I would say we think about these as expectations that we have of employees. These are also expectations that employees should have of the leaders in the company. And we talk about those within my standard work as I have discussions with my leadership team on a monthly basis. Next slide, please. These are the kind of the Shingo guiding principles. Again, not going to spend any time here. Align, enable, improve. These were, I think, that triangle and the linkage between these was part of Mike's introductory comments. So I think a great fit here. And one of the things I try and keep in mind as I conduct my standard work is where the discussions and the decisions and the work that I'm focused on consistent with the guiding principles as have been kind of defined by Shingo. When we talk about these fundamental truths in the company, we always talk about, there's no guarantee that the behaviors and principles will ensure your success, but we always talk about them within the framework of that first line, which is if we believe if we practice and model these principles and corresponding behaviors, it will continue to provide us with the highest probability of success in achieving our purpose and our long-term goals. Okay. Next slide, please, Mike. So this is, we've done a lot of work in the area of kind of the fundamental leadership behaviors. Next slide. One of those fundamental leadership behaviors, is self-discipline, and one of the reinforcing behaviors of self-discipline is leader standard work. And the simple definition of that is it's a personal platform on which you practice or improve, or I might say experiment. And it really blends everything that I've just talked about, the artifacts in particular and purpose. It really blends your principles and behaviors with kind of the skills and tasks that you apply on a daily basis. Okay? And we've done some work that you'll see in some upcoming slides as part of my kind of reflection and personal growth. You'll see some of the spider diagram charts that we've used with the team to assess, kind of our growth and personal transformation as we go about building an improvement culture. Okay? So this is just a visual, again, another visual cue that we've published, we've posted, and we're communicating what the necessary leadership behaviors are. If you model those, it'll, again, increase the probability of success as we continue to transform our work and our company. Next slide, please. Okay. This is one of our most important visual cues. It's, we use the strategy deployment process, and this is our X matrix. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with this. We've kind of chunked this down and simplified it. And if you start at the 12 o'clock segment, what are our long-term goals? Then if you move to 9 o'clock, what do we need to do this year to be successful? And 12 o'clock is, I guess, what are the plans? And then 3 o'clock is how we measure. So this is a matrix that allows us to have a conversation with employees, and we've supported this with a strategy deployment focus, basically focused only on what are the plans. And the link there is, for me, this is an important artifact because it guides my work as the CEO and strategy leader for the company. Okay. The link to leader standard work here is beyond that. We have specific A3 plans that are in kind of an architecture, and a lot of the content that I discuss with my leaders as part of that standard work communication is the status of those A3s and relative progress against the goals. We'll see more of that in just a few minutes here. Next slide, please, Mike. Next kind of artifact, if you will, that gives context, I should say, to the management system, if you will. And if you read from left to right, you'll see under the fifth oval over with the header Lean Management Systems, again, the critical one for me and our leaders that we've cascaded down through the organization is the first one listed there, which is leader standard work, and the components of visual controls or management, accountability, that's the check, accountability and support meetings, and then the discipline that supports that personal management system. Okay, just another visual. Next slide, please, Mike. Okay, and just to summarize all of that, just think about all of that purpose, principles, behaviors, leadership behaviors. Think about those as context, really important context, that provide guidance and direction for how I should think about behaving and focusing my time. And a big part of that is my personal growth and learning as a CEO. And all of those are really the building blocks of what we would say is our management system. Personally, I think what you'll see, given the work we've done and how we've changed the company in the last 5 to 6 years, that a significant part of my personal focus on the principles, which I think are reflected in my standard work, are just constancy of purpose, thinking systematically or holistically about everything is linked, and then the alignment of enterprise resources with strategy. And I think you'll see that. I find myself saying from time to time, if anybody needs clarity on how we should be thinking about solving a problem, or needs guidance about what principles we should apply, that basically everything we need to know is on the wall. So if you look on the walls of our conference rooms, we have purpose and core values and guiding principles and leadership behaviors. Next matrix is posted there. If anybody needs any context about how to guide a decision or a problem being solved, everything basically we need to know is on the wall. Okay. So again, that's just context. Next slide, please, Mike. So this is the first pass of my standard work, and I apologize, it's a little bit of an eye chart. I think this goes back to 2016 when I first developed this, and we kind of used it as a kind of an A3 template, if you will. We kind of maybe adjusted a bit the A3 problem solving template. And how I got started on this path of my own personal standard work was when we really began thinking about how do we broaden and then sustain the culture of improvement in the company. How do we think about really broadening the skill base and the experience base and the number of leaders and managers equipped to conduct A3 thinking and problem solve and model appropriate behaviors and so on. And so the work started as that, and the initial, quote, problem that I was trying to solve was putting plans in place to kind of build out our continuous improvement system. Okay? And if you jump to the next page, Mike, I think the critical part of that, and I've kind of, hopefully this is a little bit more legible. I think that the important part about that was I really lacked a standard work kind of commitment to continuous improvement. We didn't really have a concrete plan. We were doing a lot of really cool things and building on our experience, but we didn't have an end game in mind. And so I think this work kind of led us down that path initially, as well as built the framework to kind of look at improvement, personal improvement in a discipline basis. And I described the current conditions there and the gap in our efforts really to increase pull versus push. Okay. Next slide, please, Mike. Having one more view here. In the critical questions, that one of the things that we did with probably pretty disciplined cadence, we had a very disciplined monthly review process with my direct reports, and it's, it's both push and pull. The content of those discussions, they were structured, might have been an hour and a half, in some instances 2 hours. Those discussions were specifically structured around really behaviors, leader standard work, and planning. And they really weren't business focused in terms of, trying to solve operating business problems. There's kind of different forums for that. So those monthly meetings, which we called Catchball, we developed a standard list of questions. So we had standard work that we built inside of those monthly Catchballs, and this is the list that we kind of walk through together. And it kind of started with, we have 3 strategic priorities in the company. Like the first question is, what are your top 3? And are they aligned? Are they lined up? Are they aligned with the X matrix? If so, great. If not, why? And that was a series of conversations that would extend out of that. Then it, kind of got down into, what do we need to do to move the priorities forward? And then specifically, we kind of began discussing their individual development of their standard work and personal development in terms of, hey, what progress have you made yourself with the development of your standard work? And we discussed that. We pulled a document out, we discussed it. What progress have you made on leadership behaviors? Because each of our team had selected 2 where they believed through their personal assessments they had gaps and they wanted to develop. And then, part of the feedback for me was, what do I need to be doing more of, less of? What do you need from me? How can I help you be more effective in your role? And then, and then personal progress from their perspective, how are you doing with your own personal development? If you selected reflection and asking questions, or reflection and Gemba as a development need, how are you making out? And what's the evidence of that? And then we, a few more questions, and then we had time at the end for open discussion. So these were our standard work questions within the standard work that I have of monthly meetings with my leadership team members. Next slide, please, Mike. The leadership behaviors that I referenced earlier, self-discipline, this is the radar chart or the spider chart. My personal, assessment, going back a couple of years now, is that where I really had gaps, if you will, initially was in the area of leader standard work. And I know this might be hard for some of my team members to believe, but effective, like listening and asking questions. I had historically been the prototypical CEO, going back a number of years, is quite comfortable telling people what to do. And, a big part of my personal transformation has been really working at asking questions, asking and not telling. So the 2 key areas for me are really personal reflection and then asking questions. And those are kind of what I've been working at to see within my standard work document. Next slide, please, Mike. I think what we learned after probably 6 or 8 months of practice, if you will, with that kind of first experiment, I think we learned pretty quickly that the scope of the standard work was really too narrowly defined on just continuous improvement. As well, it was an important part of my role. It wasn't all of my role. Okay. I think initially, until we had adoption, 4 or 5 months in, the CEO was like the sole practitioner. So I was kind of practicing on my own. The catchball sessions that we had monthly with the leaders kind of stopped between, it was 2-way. It was an individual leader and myself, right? And kind of were limited to those discussions. People really appreciated the questions, and as we found over time, as we practiced, that we were able to be very efficient in those discussions. because we all knew exactly what we were going to discuss and came prepared to discuss them efficiently. And I think then we also struggled a little bit with, particularly in the area of leadership behaviors, like how do we measure that? How do we know? What's the evidence that we're practicing, and how do we go about measuring that and kind of modeling those behaviors? Next slide, please, Mike. So as a result of that learning, let's go back one there. As a result of that learning, we made some adjustments. And so I broadened the work, my personal standard work, to include the fuller inventory of everything I'm responsible for. Our leadership team members developed their personal standard work. So the next level of leaders, which we have since extended down to their direct report. So we're 3 levels in the organization now. The questions that I illustrated earlier on the A3 plans, it was classic, hindsight is now so clear, it was classic A3 thinking, where all those conversations that were created as a result of those questions were just A3 thinking, and it built consensus and alignment. So I think the consensus was do more there. We thought it would be incredibly effective if the leadership team members then conducted catch-all on a monthly basis with their peers. So we began disciplined and structured catch-all, COO to CFO and CFO to HR and so on. And in my opinion now, that's probably the most important dynamic taking place in our collective standard work, those peer catch-all sessions to either discuss standard work or A3s that exist at the enterprise level or other issues or gaps. We did a tremendous amount of work in developing standard work for our meetings and commitments so we can be efficient there. We are still grappling with the measures. And then we expanded, we got a little ambitious, and we said, let's work on identifying all the leadership behaviors, changing ourselves as opposed to just select 2. Okay, so next page, Mike. So again, I don't know if you have tablets, whether you can zoom here or see this a little bit more legible, but generally this is the current template, I should say, that I'm using. Looks a little different than the A3 template that I started with. I'd say that the top third, all of the activities in the top third of that, it's a strategy, deployment review, operating budgets, communication, management system, fiduciary, board of directors. I view those as kind of my corporate fiduciary responsibilities as CEO. I spend approximately 30% of my time is dedicated to those. We could have a separate debate as to whether that's value added in terms of supporting our purpose or not. But most of those I don't have an option to decline. And I think that we've done some really good work as you kind of move to the right. We've got great discipline and standard work within those meetings. So for our Monday executive leadership team meeting, we have a defined agenda, purpose, rules of engagement, due dates for content, note takers, and so on. So we've been very disciplined about supporting the standard work that's in our areas of responsibilities with specific standard work as we go about conducting our leadership team meetings, our quarterly board meetings, our monthly operations meetings, our monthly strategy deployment meetings. So virtually all of those commitments have standard work themselves. And we've been learning and adjusting down inside of those as we've gone along the way. I think the most important part of my work is that next kind of third, which is the leadership standard work check, if you will. And I just listed the roles, the leadership roles in the company. That's a monthly cadence that I talked about that's 90 minutes to maybe 2 hours in length at some point. And the standard work for those meetings is, as I referenced earlier, which is significantly it's a review of their standard work, and you'll see some examples of that later on in these slides, or it's a dynamic or catch-all discussion on one of our enterprise A3 plants. Okay, so we've really tried to limit the focus of those discussions to kind of behaviors and planning or catch-all and development, as opposed to trying to solve business problems. And there are separate venues for that. And then Gemba down below we think about Gemba, both physical and physical locations and not physical locations. I guess I would view the monthly cadence with my leadership team, those catch-balls, as Gemba. Their discussions, we always learn something and we always make adjustments. And then finally at the bottom, as we think about those leadership behaviors, the couple initially that I took responsibility was with reflection, and then leadership behaviors in general. I started with reflection and asking questions. The reflection piece is very critical for all of us. And I've, through practice, been able to chunk that down into kind of two buckets of reflection, if you will. The first bucket that I try and practice on a cadence is around personal growth, personal development. Am I modeling the behaviors? What could I have done differently? The second bucket is really, thinking about business issues, business gaps that we have. So I try to chunk those into two discrete segments as I think about just reflection in general. Next slide, please, Mike. This is just kind of the second page it's the reminder for me. So in addition to the questions that we had, top 3 priorities, are you spending your time? We've begun practicing kata questions as we engage in discussions around A3s or problem solving. And so we've got the kata formats and kind of outline and sequence of questions here. And we've begun to practice those within the leadership discussions we have on a monthly basis. And we're trying to standardize that as it cascades down through the organization. Next slide, please, Mike. Just how am I doing? Red and green. I'll talk about this in just a minute. Next slide, please, Mike. And then we've done some fuller work. So the radar chart or spider diagram was really designed for kind of an assessment of yourself, okay, your self-assessment. We took that a little bit step further. We had each of our leaders provide me with their perspective on how they viewed me modeling these behaviors. And then in turn, they did some peer reviews of each other. So it's just a visual cue that, this is our perceptions of ourselves or people's perceptions of us. And we've been trying to measure and monitor this over time, as we kind of wrestled with how do we put some definitions in measuring our progress or, measuring where we are at this particular point in time. Okay. Next slide, please, Mike. So I would say that the learning now, so I think this assessment of what we're learning now was probably back in from November. I think there's probably 3 more slides I can add right now with adjustments we've made since November here as we continue to learn. But I would just say that one of the things we've really spent a lot of time on with direct reports and peers is, hey, let's make sure if we're going to meet, we're going to have that catch ball. Let's just not check the box so it's green, red. Had the meet, been there, done that, got the t-shirt kind of thing. So we've been very focused on building out standard work content for those discussions so we could make them as effective and as relevant as possible. I think we've really worked at improving the quality and the content of those discussions. I think that's really been helpful. I think the A3 plans, we've got 3 strategic ones. Those are supported by underlying plans across the enterprise. And I think one of the things we've learned through all of the discussion is we need to do more work in encouraging those dialogues and expectations and accountabilities, 2 levels down or 3 levels down in some instances, down and across the organization. So we're making some adjustments there so that we have better line of sight as to whether all of the kind of underlying plans that are contributing to strategy are also on track, or whether or not adjustments need to be made there. We've got a feedback loop that we've created now on the leadership behaviors for ourselves and with peers. And I would expect probably every 6 months or so, we would fill out the spider diagrams or radar chart again, just to have a current view of the kind of the current state of where we believe we are. And the most exciting part for me is in a very short period of time, we have really gifted leaders in the company. This has really become pull for them versus pushing the CEO down. And they've taken this work and the work that we're doing and just run really beyond where I've started with them. I think I got some examples of that. Next slide, please. So this is our Chief Operations Officer. This is his standard work, and so you think about it, he's ultimately responsible for all of the sourcing of raw materials and manufacturing processes, distribution, really the value add. Okay, and if you recall Mike's slide at the beginning in terms of standard work being the bridge between strategy and then operations and daily improvement, what I really enjoy that our operations leader has done here is if you can just see how he's ordered his work. It starts with his, what are the requirements on a daily basis. So this is what I should be doing daily, or this is what I should be monitoring daily, so we can ensure that we're meeting expectations of the customer. And then it kind of cascades. These are the activities that I have a weekly cadence on, monthly cadence, quarterly cadence, annual cadence. So, I mean, what's very interesting just about this simple change in the format is Jeff has already made the shift between the strategic discussions that he and I have and how they cascade down through the organization, and the direct link to the operations of the daily management that's required to continue to be successful. So there's been some really, really, really good work done here. And then in turn, I feel very comfortable that the standard work of all of his direct reports looks very, very similar to this. The distinction might be that there may be a longer list of line items on a daily or weekly basis, given that they're closer to the value added than Jeff, and maybe less on a quarterly or annual basis. But I feel very comfortable that we've got line of sight on the linkage between standard work, strategy, and then daily improvement. Next slide, please, Mike. This is our Chief Financial Officer's standard work, which is kind of similar to mine in some respects because he has some of the same fiduciary responsibilities as I do. So I won't go into all of the detail here, but this you can see within the context of this, he has catch ball with myself on a monthly basis, catch ball with peers, and then we've cascaded that down, catch ball with all of his direct reports. Okay. And next slide, if I could here, Mike. And what Jim has done is just really kind of outlined in this slide and the next, outlined the content of each of those discussions on a every other week basis or monthly basis, and what they'll be focused on and discussing in each of those. Every other week it'll be business issues or every third week it'll be personal development, or every other week it'll be leadership, standard work, etc. So he's actually gone down further to define the standard work interactions with all of his direct reports in the finance and IT organizations. Next slide down. One more slide here, Mike. And I think you can see, just back one more, I'm sorry. I think you can see in Jim, what Jim has done is, and the questions kind of should look familiar. These are the standard work questions that they will review when he sits down with his people, or when his peers sit down with one another. And I think we've got line of sight there. Pretty similar. They should look pretty similar if you get into the detail there. So we've got good management discipline cascading this work down through the organization. Really encouraging to see where people have adopted it, learned, and adjusted given their own organizations or situations. Next slide, please, Mike. So I think, just for me, just final thoughts from my perspective. I think the analogy, again, for leaders, for C-suite leaders in particular, I think the analogy of standard work being the bridge between strategy and operations, I think it's a terrific visual. For me, I think about that standard work. It's my personal management system. Okay? It's the accountability for what I should be spending my time on, and it's the accountability to kind of try and measure and monitor what we learn so we can make adjustments. So I think about, just about it as your personal management system. For me, as in C-suite leaders, I think you really need to think systematically and be able to make the direct link between what you're doing, what you're working on, and how you're behaving between, purpose inside of True North and the values, core values of the company, guiding principles and leadership behaviors. The more you can think systematically to link it all back to that, the more powerful it will be in terms of driving alignment. Alignment and focus against the key things. If you aren't using it currently, the format really doesn't matter. Just start doing, and as you start to practice, the format or template you use will evolve. It's kind of got to work for you. There's no right or wrong way. I think the critical part is just jump in and start doing and start experimenting, and then apply PDCA to that. Plan, do, check, adjust. Plan, do, survey, adjust, whichever you prefer. I think that reflection, focused reflection, and just a check and getting feedback from the people who you're using it with will be very helpful to have you think about what adjustments you need to make personally. And then finally, I would just urge you to keep, discipline the reflection and keep experimenting and learn and adjust as you get it underway. Again, that's just my, perspective. I think everybody's individual situation, role, somewhat unique, but we've just tried to apply standard work as our management system, if you will, within the context of, purpose, values, principles, behaviors. And at the end of the day, the intent of all of this is to guide the business results. So we can continue to sustain the company. So I think that's the end of my prepared comments. Mike, if there's any questions, perhaps?
Thanks, Kevin. I'm going to unmute the phones. So a question here from one of the participants. What led you to decide to go down this route? What were the motivators for your doing this?
Yeah, really good question. So I struggled with when I first kind of gained insight on the standard work, kind of the tools, if you will, of standard work. I thought, that's really for people that are closer to the the value adder. It's not for the CEO. There's nothing about my role that's standard. And I think as I gained insight from others and just really learned through some outside sources and professional network, that there actually is a fair amount of consistency and discipline in the CEO's role. I think what I've done is tried to inventory all of that on my leader standard work. And when you start to think about it in that context, it just makes a lot more sense, because there actually is some level of consistency in what I do. Just the time frame may be different. It may be annually or quarterly or monthly as opposed to daily, but the time frame is just very, very different. And I think in those instances, it's even more critical that you have, a written plan to kind of keep yourself on task, if you will, because it's easy to get caught up in the urgent if you don't. So I think as I finally recognized that and got some counsel and began to experiment with it, it just became a whole lot clearer to me that many of the things that I do have consistency to them,
Okay, that's great, Kevin. Here's a question regarding obstacles you came across, things that were hard. What surprised you when you came across obstacles? How did you work through it?
Yeah, I think the first obstacle was myself, Mike. Because, it did take me, 12 to 18 months to kind of work out that actually standard work could work for me. So I look at that now and kind of look at that as a lost opportunity if I'd gotten a little started earlier. So I think that would be one, yourself is the biggest barrier. I would say it's easy to get stuff on paper. It's easy to put words on paper, and this is true for any plans. Plans don't exist till they're written down. I would just say it takes a fair amount of self-discipline to really build on and evolve and sustain this work. It takes a fair amount of self-discipline to be able to do that. And I think we have been at improvement long enough where I'm not really involved in the firefighting. People don't come into my office with their hair on fire kind of stuff. I think we've got decent systems and processes in place. So it gives me the luxury of being able to be focused on the important and to have the capacity to continue to discipline my standard work.
That's great.
Sustaining this is it's hard to do. It's to sustain.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Here's a question from one of the participants, curious about, you use the term think systematically versus think systemically. Is that something you see different, or is it a language thing?
Yeah, it may just be a language thing here. I'm strolling around in my office here this afternoon, so it may have been just a language thing. But the systematically or systematically is really, I'll just go back to Shingo. And the oversimplified way is like everything is related to everything else, and decisions you do or don't make generally affect everything in the enterprise. So as we've kind of rolled out our standard work and our management system and our strategy deployment process discipline, we've tried to be really thoughtful about how it, what does it impact, how does it impact the organization, and how do we make adjustments so that everything evolves over time, as opposed to jumping into flavor of the month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So systematically, it's really important to keep it in mind. We've also acquired, Mike. We've acquired. I think the company in the last decade has done about 11 or 12 acquisitions. So as we've acquired, thinking systematically is really, really important as we contemplate how to integrate and consolidate the various business systems into standardizing and simplifying those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Thanks for that clarification. We'll probably have more conversation about, how the words are defined down the road, but appreciate that clarification. So here's a question. What did you have to do to get to a point of understanding that you need to reflect regularly?
That's a great question. I don't think that I'm part of a cohort of C-suite leaders that are kind of all practicing personal growth and development, and I think all of us have really embraced the leadership behaviors and the reinforcing behaviors underneath those leadership behaviors. I think reflection is a critical one that needs to be disciplined, put on your calendar, because all of us are running around doing stuff all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that peer perspective, and then just the understanding the importance of reflection. It's difficult to learn without and make adjustments in the heat of the day to day or whatever it is, without consciously and purposely taking some time to reflect.
Mm-hmm. It's great clarification.
And I've tried to evolve that, Mike, into two buckets. And trust me, it's a work in progress. But I try to be purposeful about this reflection time. I'm going to focus on me, like what do I need to do differently, and how could I have handled that situation, or how should I have communicated there, or how should I have modeled that, as opposed to, hey, how are we going to handle this problem with, insert any one of 1,000, business challenges we all have. I try to separate those two so I could maintain the integrity of my personal growth.
That's great. Question here, as you've cascaded this through your leadership team, without simply telling them what to do, what have you learned most successfully gets them on board?
I think I think the value, and I think there may be one or two of my team members on the call there. I think the value, where it became really valuable for them, it was focused time, the catchballs. It was focused time on their personal development and personal growth. Okay. And I think I think they saw the value in that. And then on the flip side, it was also focused time. If it was an A3, we were working through, focused time on just trying to, collaborate on problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those discussions apparently have provided enough value to the leaders that they've taken it and run with it, and have deployed it one, or in some instances 2 levels down in their organizations. So the unintended consequence here, I think that focused time it has really been development time and investment in development time for all of those leaders.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All of us are still growing here.
That's great. Question here, I guess a bit of a reflection. What would you do differently if you were to start over, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. That's I think that's a hard one. I might have started earlier, but there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not looking back. I don't know that I'd necessarily change anything, because we had been the circumstances were different in the company when we started this 18 months ago than they are today. So I think we've made adjustments. I think the business circumstances and the state of the company have some influence over all this. I don't really have anything I'd like to change, other than we've been learning and adjusting very, very quickly. I think you may have seen some of this content, prior, Mike, a few months ago, and it's there's been material changes since we last spoke here.
Right.
And there's more that I don't have the capacity to even share. There's more that we've done in the last 90 days, it's not really fully reflected here.
Mm-hmm. And along those lines, there's a question, is your pace of maturity sustainable? Are you progressing fast enough?
I would say I would say that in my standard work relationships with my direct reports, I'm comfortable with where they are at this stage. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the work that we have ahead of us that we're trying to accelerate is that next level down, the standard work interactions and relationships between our C-suite leaders and their direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
And then in turn, those direct reports and one more level down is appropriate.
Okay.
So I think for me, the challenge or the gap is how effectively can we deploy this, management system, management process, standard work down into really key leaders and managers in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think fully mature. There may be 100 or so people that are actually practicing it, and today we might be halfway there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So a question here, at what point in the overall, call it lean transformation journey, did you start this, I guess assuming we're started talking about leader standard work, where did it come into play?
Yeah, so I would say we kind of we seized on. I've had the benefit of continuity in my CEO role. I've been CEO since president or CEO since 2005. So probably since 2006 or 7, we've been kind of working at continuous improvement. I think in had a couple starts, a stop, and a restart. We kind of saw the Shingo framework around 13, I think it was, which just gave context to what just made a lot of sense first because it was the framework and context, and we've been learning at that since 13. I think within the management system, leader standard work, I would say we started it, I started practicing, I think it was probably mid 2016. So, not very probably mature at this stage, but it's been through a lot of evolution in a relatively short period of time with myself and leaders anyways.
Great. I've had a couple people ask questions about copies of the slides and also if there's larger copies of any of the support documents. And I'm assuming, Kevin, you're okay with a PDF copy made available to folks. And if people want additional copies, we can work through that as well.
Yeah, I think that's fine, Mike. I mean, I've obviously gotten permission from my leaders to share their work. But yes, I think that's fine, Mike.
Okay, we'll work offline with that. I appreciate that. And finally, Kevin, again, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It was a wonderful presentation. It reminds me so much of the path of Sami Bari, the first lean dentist. And the first book was written about him through the Lean Enterprise Institute called Follow the Learner. And it seems like you're very much a learner, humble in sharing what you're learning and willing to continue to improve. So I think that's great. What happens next is, thanks, Kevin. What happens next is this recording on our website. You'll go to the webinars page, and this recording will end up over on the right-hand column, and you'll be able to access it there. And what happens next is in February, I'm doing a bit of a year in review, a year plus in review of some of the key webinars we've had and some of the key concepts that people haven't had a chance to take advantage of those. So I'll be sharing that in February. I got a few topics in the works. Katie Anderson has agreed to do something on the topic of daily intentional practice, which I think Kevin hit upon here as far as building new habits and new routines. I've talked to the folks at Winona Health, several topics about that we've decided we'd like to feature there. Probably next in line will be something around our work on the Pracademics Guide to Strategy Deployment will be something that we'll feature there. And you may have heard of this Cynefin sense-making model. It's a model that describes what kind of system are you dealing with, and what kind of things work and don't work related to it. Is it a complex system, a simple system? And I found it interesting, and they're willing to share that. So we've got that going on. I mentioned Winona Health in planning for their presentation. They shared with me on their website that they host site visits. And if you're interested in that, you can learn about what they're doing directly, and they're willing to share their work through site visits. If you happen to be in the Twin Cities, March the 6th, or in the area, we'll be doing a one-day presentation with the Performance Excellence Network, sharing network here, hosted by the folks at Boston Scientific. So you can learn more about that by going to that bit.ly link at the bottom. And if anyone that participates either today or hears the recording would like to share one of their learnings or have a recommendation for a story they'd like to learn about, there's my contact information. You can contact me that way. You can also participate in our discussions on the LinkedIn Pracademic Learning and Sharing Network. So again, I want to thank Kevin for taking the time. I want to thank everyone on the call for taking the time to participate today. A copy of this recording will be available for others to share if you would like. So hope everyone has a good day. If you're traveling, hope you travel safe. Thanks a lot.
Yep. Thank you, Mike.
You bet, Kevin.